is good if there's nothing good when compared to this? And just to go back to the first question you asked and say, does culture stabilize or destabilize, or tech stabilize or destabilize culture? And I think Nelson also mentioned to say, what is culture, and is there a good or bad, or is there a right or wrong question, culture? If you would permit me to share briefly and just to ask the audience to probably give their comments in the chat section. Just checking, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So if we could just look at this picture on the right side, is this a 6 or a 9? Is it a 6 or a 9? Or when is it a 6 and when is it a 9? Any takers? Is this a 6? Is it a 9? Okay, message says 9. Depends on how you view it. As a fisherman, you see a hook. That's interesting. I'm going to use that somewhere. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to, okay, that's Nelson. I'm going to reference you so that I don't suffer plagiarism. It depends on when you're standing. It is a 6. When is it a 6? When is it a 9? From one angle, it is a 6. From one angle, it is a 9. Thank you. So culture is relative. And if you look at this second image as well, is it a 3 or a 4? Again, it depends on where you stand. So we like to emphasize this point to say culture is a relative phenomenon. You cannot call culture good or culture bad. It depends on where you're coming from. It depends on the context that you're viewing it in. It depends on your upbringing. It depends on the national culture, your upbringing, the things that formed your ideology. So culture is neither, from our point of view, we believe culture is neither good nor bad. It is either functional in terms of it works for you, or it is dysfunctional when it doesn't work for you. So we don't say culture is good or bad. We say culture is either functional, that is when it is aligned with your objectives, aligned with your ideals, your values. And we say it is dysfunctional when it is misaligned. Of course, there are some practices that myself being a Nigerian, I might consider acceptable. I might consider the norm. But when I get to Nairobi, I might have to learn and see how people behave within the context of that culture before I define something good or bad. And even within organizations. So what is good for Apple may not be good for Microsoft, and vice versa. So just to cap it in, so culture is a group phenomenon. It's the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes one group from the other. Culture is a relative phenomenon. It has to be in comparison, and culture is neither good nor bad. It depends on whether it is aligned with your strategy, aligned with your objective, or it is misaligned. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much for that elaborate, in-depth insights on what culture is and what culture is not. So that takes me to the next question. Can you measure organization culture? Is it even possible?
Yes, it is. Thankfully, it is. It's one of the core foundation of what we believe in our organization of Study Insights. Culture can be measured. Thankfully, Professor Geert Hofstede is late now. He passed on in 2020 at age 92. He came up with dimensions to explain the concept called culture. So he came up with dimensions of both national culture or organizational culture. Now, these dimensions are are a way to define a subject as fuzzy as culture. Because culture is mostly seen as a fuzzy subject most of the time. And this dimension, just like the color wheel, if you know the color wheel, the RGB, that's the red, green, blue. So you have just these three colors, but depending on how you combine them, you have different hues and different shades of colors that originated from this three primary colors, RGB, the RGB model. The same way, he used the concept of dimensions to create a way to measure culture. So he came up with 6 dimensions of culture and national culture, and also 6 dimensions of organizational culture. And we are able to use these dimensions and the model that we developed from the dimensions to measure our culture.
Okay. So I think in the next session, you will take us in depth on how to measure organization culture. But for now, is automation necessary? And what are the chances that it promotes or dilutes organization culture? Takes us back to the first question I asked. Does it stabilize or does it destabilize organization culture? That is automation and tech. Let's hear from you, the experts.
Okay, so I'm going to put on the hat of Hofstede Insights, then answer the question, and I'm going to answer as Michael. So answering as the head of knowledge services in Hofstede Insight, I would say it depends. It depends. We're careful to take a hard stance on culture and what impacts it or not. So depending on the context, depending on how it is used, depending on the country, the national culture context, depending on the kind of industry an organization would be in, depending on the kind of strategy they have, their objectives, it can either promote the culture or dilute it. But as an individual, I would say I believe that tech in a lot of ways stabilizes a culture. I believe it does. I believe it helps to cement or really crystallize the beliefs that drives what an organization or a group calls their culture. I truly believe that. But from the expert point of view, or from our organization, from Hofstede Insights point of view, yes, we use a lot of tech. In fact, our organization, we like to say, is a data analytics firm that deals in culture, rather than a management consulting firm that uses data, because we use a lot of data analytics and tech to drive the things we do. So yes, culture can be measured, and to a large extent, it helps in promoting the culture of an organization. Tech helps to promote. Thank you.
So we have insights, and we are very fascinated when we heard that Hofstede, you actually have tools that measure organizational structure and cultures, thanks to the late Hofstede. May his soul rest in peace. So what are some of these tools that we can use?
Okay. So first off, maybe I should start from the national culture context and build into the organizational culture. And because of the space of time, I would have loved to set up a demo project and do a simulation here on one of the tools we use to measure the culture within an organization. But I'll just talk through that and show you some of the tools we use. The first one I would like to mention is the culture compass. We have this tool called the culture compass. And what does it do? It helps organizations or individuals particularly to see to what extent their culture aligns with another culture. So say for instance, Anne is coming into Nigeria to do a symposium, to give a lecture or talk. Before she comes in, she can see the areas in which our own cultural preferences differ from the general culture in Nigeria. And I'm just going to share my screen briefly and show you some of these things. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So the first tool is called the culture compass. So it helps an individual see to what level their culture aligns with the culture that they will be visiting. Say, for instance, in this demo I have here, so you have somebody whose home country is Nigeria, just like I am, and the person is going to be a colleague in Greece, Libya, and Slovakia. So the role the Nigerian is going to play in this context is a colleague, and the countries this person is interfacing with are Greece. So you get to choose 3 countries for this tool. So what the tool does is to show your score, how an individual score on all 6 dimensions of culture. National culture now. You have power, distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty, avoidance, long-term orientation, indulgence. So you would see how an individual will see how they measure on all 6 dimensions, and will see how their behavior or their own score differs from their home country and the cultures that they will be interfacing with. So for this demo, for instance, so this is an explanation of what the dimensions mean and the consequence, and some feedback on how to read the report. So it's going to show the measurement of one of the countries, like Greece. It's going to show what Greece score and the mapping of Greece on the dimension of culture, on the 6 dimensions of culture. And then it's going to show the individual score on the 6 dimensions of culture, then provide advice on what to expect when they interface with people from Greece, based on the measurement on the 6 dimensions. So it's a simple tool. It's a simple tool that you can get even directly from the website, where you just hit and a link is set to you to fill some questionnaires. And once you fill it, you're going to get the report that follows. So it provides advice on what to expect when you're in Greece or when you're in whatever country you select. For instance, in this example, it says, when working with people from Greece as a colleague, you may give your colleagues the feeling that you are not all that committed and involved by not showing your emotional involvement. So if, for instance, you are from a cultural climb where you're more reserved and you don't show a lot of emotions, the people there might seem you as not being fully committed to the cause. So it's a really interesting tool we use for in intercultural context, where you have people interfacing with people all around the world, so they know what to expect. The next one is cultural adaptability profile. It shows the degree to which a person, an individual, or a team can survive in another context. So it shows the level of cultural resilience a person have or a group has. It shows the cultural sociability, and it shows cultural tolerance. It also shows the cultural interest that an individual will have. We call it the cultural adaptability profile. It helps to measure the degree to which a person's being in another context or dealing with group of individuals from another cultural context. It shows the level to which they can adapt, the level to which they can integrate easily into that society. And then we have, I'm just going to go to our website now, and then we have the organizational culture scan. We have this model called the MultiFocus Model on organizational culture, and it's a tool that we use to measure the culture of an organization. In any organization, we say there are 4 layers of culture. There are 4 manifestations of culture. The first one is the perceived culture, the way we think we are, So I might think I have I think I'm the most handsome person in Lagos. That's a perceived culture. That's in my mind, the way we think we are. There's the way we would like to be. We call it the desired culture. Uh, that's the way we would like to be. So based on what we have seen others, so maybe I see a movie, then I see Denzel Washington, and I'm like, oh, I would like to be like that. I would like to be as handsome as that, or whatever the context may be. And then there is the third manifestation, where the actual culture, the way you actually are. And finally, we have the optimal culture, the way you need to be if you're going to succeed as an organization. So there's the perceived culture, the way we think we are, the desired culture, the way we would like to be, the actual culture, the way we are, the way we truly are, and there is the optimal culture, the way we should be if we would succeed, if our strategy would succeed. So we have this tool called the MultiFocus Model. It helps us measure the culture of an organization on six dimensions of organizational culture, completely different from the 6 dimensions of national culture. And we deploy it through an electronic survey. And like I mentioned, because of the short time, we're not able to set up a demo simulation of that tool. I would have put in a link in the chat for us all to just go there and see what the questionnaires look like. So we measure culture using standardized surveys that we have structured. And what it helps us do is it helps us see culture empirically. So on the 6 dimensions of culture, and I don't want to go into that because of time. 6 dimensions, the first one, organizational effectiveness, how process-driven or how goal-driven are we? The second one is customer orientation. Where do we get our impulses to develop products or services? The third one is control. How do we structure our work? The fourth one is focus. Where do we get our bearing from? Whether it's, what do we emphasize the most? Is it internal loyalty or being professional, based on the context of our fields and profession? The fifth one is approachability. How open or how closed are we as an organization? And the last one is management philosophy, speaking on how are we employee-oriented or are we work-oriented? Now, we are able to measure the culture of an organization on these 6 dimensions, given specific numbers. So we have been able to take the fuzzy concept of culture and make it into numbers. So we are able to see what an organization looks like on these 6 dimensions of culture. I'm just trying to see if I could pull up a demo report to show what the culture report would look like. But basically, we use technology. We have the standardized survey. We send the surveys out to all the individuals participating in the measurements, and then using AI and machine learning, we collect the data, and we have a lot of algorithms written and a lot of code that helps us map out the data we collect from the survey responses, and then we are able to have a spread to see what the organization's cultural profile is on the 6 dimensions of culture. Just trying to see if I can get to one demo report to show. I'll pull it up. Once I have it, I'm going to share with everyone here to see what the demo report looks like. For some reason, my device will not come on. Okay.
So as we wait for Michael to pull up that demo report, I don't know if any of us has any questions. So in case you have any questions, just type it in the chat box or raise your hand up. I'm going to see, and I'm going to give you a chance to unmute and ask it. So just to take us back on some of the tools that Michael has mentioned, it's the culture compass, one of the tools that we can use to measure culture that they have developed. We have the cultural adaptability profile, and we have the MultiFocus model. And he has been kind enough to just explain to us what all these entail. Don't worry, we are going to send a write-up to you, or we're going to give you like a link to their website where there's more information on how these tools work. Michael, I don't know if you've managed to get your sample reports.
Yes, and I'm going to share it now.
Okay.
Okay. So please, can you see my screen? Just checking.
Yes, we can.
Awesome, thank you. So this is what the demo report looks like for the organization. So on the 6 dimensions, this report comes out where you're able to see the cultural profile of the organization on these 6 dimensions of culture. And what this really helps us do is it brings an objective perspective to what the culture is within an organization. Because depending on, just like the image I showed earlier, depending on where you stand within the organization, depending on your experience, your perception of what the culture is will be different from other persons within the organization. So this tool helps us bring an objective framework to how we view culture, or how we define the culture of an organization. So it brings a lot of objectivity, and it's empirical to a large extent. To nil out biases from different people's perception, to drill out the truth. And of course, we are able to see the optimal culture. So this graph I'm showing right now is showing the bars. The one on the left is the actual culture of the organization, and the blue bars is the optimal culture that would be defined using in a workshop session with the leaders of the organization to define what kind of culture should they build to support their strategy. And you're able to see the gaps between the actual culture and the optimal culture. And following off of this, we're able to provide recommendations to close that gap, to transit organizations from their actual culture to the optimal culture that will actually that will support the strategy that they have as an organization. So it gives a lot of insights into how functional or dysfunctional an organization is, the identity of the organization. Then it goes deep into each of the dimensions of culture one by one to tell you how the people responded, what is their culture scores, and what are the implications of the scores. So, of course, I can share this demo report with Anne and Nelson, and they can get it across to you so that you could just take a look and see what it looks like in a lot of detail.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing that. And we can't wait to get our hands on those so that we can delve deep and see what they have. So before I move on, we have 2 questions in the chat. And one of the question is, what approaches would you recommend in a case where a company wanted to change its culture to the one that suits them?
Yeah. Thank you, Eric, for this question. And it's quite an interesting question. So it's going to depend on what they define as what suits them. So is it what the kind of culture that aligns with your strategy, or the kind of culture that the leaders just want to see, irrespective of the strategy? But whatever the case may be, the approach is to first do a measurement of what the culture actually is. So you need to form a benchmark to say, this is where we are today. We might have an idea of where we want our culture to be, but currently this is where we are. And then to sit with the stakeholders within the organization to have a conversation, a workshop. We have this series of workshops we have with the organization to say, in light of what you're trying to achieve as an organization, in light of the end you want to see, whether it is digitization, whether it is automation within the organization, or whether you're just trying to build an agile team, how would you define success, first of all? How would you define effectiveness within your organization? And what are some of the challenges you envisage within the organization as is today? Then using this, our structured approach, we go through the 6 dimensions to say, if we're going to be a digital organization, if we're going to be an automated organization or an agile team, how do we start to shape our work in order to align with where we're going? So what I'm trying to say is, it starts out with knowing where you are currently, knowing where you are. It is. I don't want to use the word dangerous, but it is ill-advised to think of a kind of culture. Maybe you see an organization doing things a particular way, and then you say, oh, I like that, and I want our organization to do that. We advise against that a lot. We believe in thinking about your context, your industry, the strategy you're trying to achieve as an organization, the business cycle that you're in currently, the kind of business model you run. Then take a look at all these things in context of what you're trying to achieve and say, will this culture I'm trying to bring into this organization, with this culture, will it work for what we are trying to achieve? Will it work within our context? Will it be beneficial to us by and large as an organization? So it's good to have that benchmark before delving deep into bringing any form of culture to within the organization. I don't know if that answers your question, Eric.
Okay, and I think the same question is similar to what Florence is asking. What's the most effective way to inculcate desired and optimal culture in the entire organization? No, that's different. So what's the most effective way to inculcate the desired and optimal culture to the entire organization?
So unfortunately, and we found this many times, in many instances, the desired culture is not always the same as the optimal culture. So what you would like to be and what you have to be might not be the same thing. So for instance, I like donuts, and I might want to have donuts for breakfast, lunch, dinner. But in order to live a healthy life, I might need to eat vegetables. I might need to be on a diet, do exercises. It might not be the desired for me, but it's what is optimal for me. So we usually do not go the path of saying, how do we inculcate the desired to the optimal? We usually say, define what the optimal is, and then start taking steps to live that optimal culture. However, it is important to not throw away what the desired is, because it is a good motivator. So if you know the things that people desire within the organization, say for instance, people want flexible hours, people want sleep pods in the organization, like Apple. They want to have food courts, and every 5 steps you take, there is a food table there. You can just pick it and eat. Once you understand the desired culture of an organization, by the time you start implementing the changes to build the optimal culture, you can leverage some of this desired initiatives that people want to drive the implementation of the optimal culture. So say, for instance, we're in a business cycle that requires us to be more goal-driven, to push more, and to not just be process-driven or just make excuses based on the process. Like, our process says we do it this way. So even if we see opportunities to do something else, we would not do it because our process does not align with that. So if we want to be more goal-driven, it means we would have to start creating some reward system or some sanction system that helps us drive a goal-driven culture. And how do we reward people, or how do we sanction people, we can leverage the desired culture to say, what do people want, or what do people expect, or what do people like to see within the organization? And we can start using that as a motivator to drive them to align with the kind of behaviors that we expect and we want to see them exhibit within the organization. So we leverage on the desired to act as motivator to drive people towards the optimal. But ultimately, the optimal is our goal, not the desired.
Okay, there you've had it. The desired culture and the optimal culture, sometimes they might never be the same. What you desire might not work for your company at that particular time. So we have another question. What or who designs the organization culture? Is it the CEO style of management, or design, or historical way of doing things? The multi-billion-dollar question.
This is a very interesting question. Thank you, Judge, for this question. Culture flows from the top. Sadly, people would most likely do what they see their leaders do rather than what we write in the rule book, what we have in our handbook. So culture flows from the top. Ultimately, the buck stops with leadership. So the leaders of the organization will have to, they are the ones with the responsibility of crafting the culture of the organization. Because organizational culture simply is the way we behave here. Now, what that behavior would be would have to be defined by the leaders of the organization, and they would have to do it. They would have to define those sets of behaviors and practices that will support what the strategy of the organization is. So, to a large extent, the leaders of the organization, the management of the organization, would have to are responsible for crafting the culture of the organization. Now, unfortunately, many organizations are not intentional about crafting the optimal culture that supports their strategy. But the interesting thing is, whether you are intentional about it or not, the moment you have a group of people together, working together, a culture is formed. Whether you are intentional about crafting it or not. By our research, we say once you have 5 to 7 people together, working together, whether in an organizational context or in a society, a culture will form within them, the way they will start to do things. So many organizations are not intentional about crafting the right culture or the optimal culture, because we don't say right or wrong. We say, is it functional or dysfunctional? So many organizations are not intentional about crafting that. And because of that, a culture is formed that is not deliberate, a sort of, I'm looking for the right word to contextualize this now, is a sort of random culture that is really not defined, is formed within the organization. And people start to behave that way, even though they are not aware that, oh, this is our culture. They see people do something and they continue to do it, and it forms the bane of their culture. But in order to really craft what the organizational culture should be, the leaders would have to, at some point, be intentional about saying, in this organization, this is how we would behave. These are the behaviors and the practices that we would engender to drive our processes, to drive our objectives as an organization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I can see very interesting insights and remarks from Pelatia, who says to her, culture is really not written. What makes up organization culture is a combination of implemented policies. Some things being implemented are not even included in policies, but has been approved and implemented. Yeah, so those are the views, very interesting. Then we have also feedback from Florence. This then sees us having different organization culture with different leadership within the organization, meaning there's need to put in place structures to ensure that there are standards to help draw the line between the change in culture with change in leadership, since culture tends to be a more, to me, a perception a lot of the time. So, Michael, is culture a perception?
To a large extent, yes. Within an organization, though, we believe it shouldn't be about perception. Like I showed earlier, it depends on where you're standing, the point of view you have. Is it a 6? Is it a 9? Depends on where you stand. So that's perception. That's how we perceive it. Within organizations, however, we say because an organization has a goal, has a strategy, it is dangerous to leave the way we are going to behave within the organization to perception. And just like Florence is spot on to say, we would have to be intentional about putting structures in place to define the kind of policies, the kind of practices that we're going to engender within the organization, so that different people coming from different places will not bring their perception on what is right and infuse it within our context and expect everybody to just follow suit without taking cognizance of our context, our strategy, our background, and the goal we are trying to achieve as an organization.
And that brings me to the next question, the structured culture. So should it be documented or should it be implied?
Well, from an organizational context, if it is not, if there are no written policies or our handbook, it might be difficult to have a record of it and have it pass on. But the real embed to really embed a culture within an organization, it has to be lived. I don't want to use the word implied. I would say it has to be exemplified by the leaders of the organization. So if we say we are going to be a goal-driven organization, or if we say we're going to be innovative as an organization, the leaders, and when I say leadership, and I don't mean just the top leaders, I mean leaders at different levels of the organization, they have to display tendencies, they have to exemplify tendencies that show that we believe that innovation is important to us and we are going to drive it. So it has to be written, yes, but it has to be seen in our behaviors and our practices as an organization. So implied, maybe I'm trying to run from the word implied, because when something is implied, you leave it to the perception or the definition, the interpretation of who is receiving it or who you are talking to. So it has to be defined and exemplified so that everyone else within the organization can follow suit to the behaviors the city leaders promote.
Very interesting. So we need to document, we need to say, this is how we behave, this is how we dress, this is how we do certain things and all that. So very important aspect. And I love the question that Stella brings out. We have noted that in most of the organizations, they usually change the top management when they want to change culture. What are your thoughts on this? Is it safe?
Well, sometimes we find that is necessary because, just like I say, culture flows from the top down. Unfortunately, it is difficult to build a culture from the ground up if the leaders are not exemplifying it. So if we're trying to change our culture and the leaders we have demonstrated, I'm trying to be careful with how I put this out now. They have demonstrated that they are not willing to change or to behave in the ways that align with the new culture. Then it might be necessary to let them go. So if there is no willingness to change, so it's different from having the capacity or ability to change. That can be a training need, or something would have to coach them to learn how to change their behavior. But if they have demonstrated unwillingness to change, to align with the new culture, yes, it might be necessary. And Stella, I believe that is why in most instances when organizations are trying to change their culture. So many times we see a leadership change, because if the leaders don't change, then the culture would not change.
Okay, if the leadership won't change, then the culture won't change. Yeah. So Irene has brought out very interesting questions, and I believed you had answered one of them. What are the indicators of a good culture for a leader? And I think, Irene, our feedback was, if it works for the organization, if it helps promote the objectives of the organization, then we actually said we have no good culture and bad culture. Yeah. So we have a functional culture and a dysfunctional culture. But now your other question, which I'd love Michael to answer, how can culture be a competitive advantage for a business?
Thank you for that question. So culture, like I said, is a relative concept, and culture is in comparison. So you have the financial industry, for instance, and you have different banks. They basically have the same kind of guidelines to a large extent because they're regulated. But what would differentiate one bank, a commercial bank, from another commercial bank will be we say the people. But usually it's not just the people, it is the way the people work together. And the way the people work together is what culture is. So the way we have chosen to work, the behaviors and practices we promote within an organization can be a huge competitive advantage. So you have people in the same sector, the same industry, the same regulators, the same markets, but they are able to do things differently. Their people are able to work in a more collaborative, more innovative way. Why? Because they have defined some set of practices, some set of culture, behaviors that helps them promote their way of working and achieve success compared to other organizations. So it can be a competitive advantage for organizations. And linking it back to culture not being good or bad, Netflix in the past 3 years, the narrative is changing now in the past year, but Netflix has been under the gun for having a toxic culture. They emphasize this A-type people. They don't mind if you steal the idea of a colleague and present it as yours. They are looking for type A people who are go-getters, people who would achieve success at all costs. And a lot of people have said this is a toxic culture and it's not sustainable. But guess what? They are the largest streaming company globally. So it might be toxic and many times it might not be beneficial. But from a business standpoint, is it working for them? Are they achieving their strategy? Are they succeeding? So if the answer is yes, are we right to call it a bad culture for them? Maybe from the context we're coming from, maybe some of the behaviors and practices may not align, but we, to a large extent, say, if it is working for your strategy, if it is helping you achieve your objectives, and as long as it's not contravening any ethical issue, then maybe it's the right culture for you to have within that period. Of course, as your strategy changes, you might need to change your culture as well. As your objective changes, you might need to change your culture as well, because culture has to be a tool to support your strategy within the organization.
Thank you very much for that. And I can see time is really not favoring us at the moment. And we have so many questions. We have also someone asking for a sample culture change roadmap, which I believe you say you will share some of the tools you have, including the reports and all that. So Violet, we are going to share once we receive the same from Michael. And he's also going to share with us just details and just brief notes on where do you start when you're planning to do an organization change. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I've said, time has really decided, no, we are not taking this further, but worry no more. We still have your backs. We are going to bring Michael back to share the real demo for us on just some of these tools for measuring culture. We are going to share the details of some of the information and just the takeaways that he needs us to have as far as culture is concerned and culture change management is concerned. And we'll be happy to selflessly share this with you. So I can see Nelson has posted some of the information on the system demos that we have: WorkPay, HR, Made, Spy Assistant. And we are also going to have someone from Hofstede share with us the website details and the contacts in case you need to reach Michael. He's also on LinkedIn with the names Michael Davids. So feel free to engage with him, feel free to ask other questions. And once we arrange a follow-up session, we'll be glad to share details with you. So allow me to end this particular section. Thank you so much, Michael, for being selfless with your knowledge and just some of the tools that you people have that you use to promote just organizational change and culture and all that. So I have been your moderator for the day, Bahati Ann, and I am gladly handing over the session to Nelson. Nelson, over to you.
Thank you very much. I really learned, and I think I'm going to be one of the contributors, as Michael had said. I mentioned the hook, so Michael, make sure that my name is is in the Hofstede's culture change. Now, I just want to ask one question for Michael. I know you are sharing this very busy, and we just gave you a little bit of our time, and now it is us who now want more of your time. Is it possible you come back next week on Thursday, same time, for a real demo? Check your calendar.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
Yes.
I would let you know. I would let you know.
Yeah. So, team, because we also been doing demos, and we like demos where people can actually see that it is actually happening in a system, and we can see that the technology that you are working on, not a paper thing that someone will go and change some aspects. So whatever you give, that whatever comes out. So that was a good presentation, and I've really learned much. And I would also request the team that once we share the details to the Hofstede's website, kindly visit that website. I've been visiting it as a silent follower since I learned that they have good systems. And you know very well that I deal with data analysis. So that has been my home in terms of culture issues as I do my research. So make use of that website. We've also shared details for our partners. You can check their systems and actually work with them. And if you're looking to transform your company, then sales that we've given out can actually support you. So we'll share the links again for YouTube recording that we've been doing the past, and even for the future one that we'll be hosting. So feel free to join our sessions every Thursday from 8 to 9. Now that we are doing this as a religion, we'll continue having these sessions, and don't ever look anywhere when looking at HR systems. And where do I learn more about HR systems? Look at yourself, where you want to be, the changes that you're having. For those of us who are in Kenya, our government is looking at automating all of its operations. So get the skills first from the HR side. We're also learning how do we change the culture? How do we change our mindsets towards that? So it is helpful for us to become the pioneers in accepting government's agenda in terms of transformation digital. So thank you all. And I want to appreciate all team members for attending this session. Till next Thursday, when we'll be now creating a culture of recognition, recognizing our top learners for the activity. So for those of us who watch football, Arsenal is playing now. Manu will be playing at 10:45. So you stay woke because Manu will do something great. Thank you very much, and we appreciate. And Michael, pass our regards to our brothers in Nigeria. Tell them that we'll be coming there, and they should be joining us actually.
No worries, yeah. No worries. Look forward to being in Kenya soon.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'm sharing the YouTube link for the previous talks. So if you just want it, just stay in the chat. I bring it up. So we may want to leave at our own pleasure. I can see Jellican is here. Jellican is a friend of Nigeria, actually. There's one person who does talks with Nigerians, is more with Jellican. You might have seen him in the Agile HR groups.